You're listening to old Western stories, where dust settles slow, guns speak loud, and every tale rides straight into your imagination. Hit that subscribe and saddle up, the ride's just startin'. Evening bled slow across the horizon as Mason Creel rode the last mile into Waylon. The trail behind him was streaked with old light, and the wind carried the dry taste of dust and iron. His horse moved at a weary gait, head low, leather creaking with each step. Tied to the saddle horn rode a boy, Noah Harper, hands bound, hat gone, shirt torn at one sleeve. The kid sat quiet as stone. Creel had hauled plenty of men and some worse than men, but this one was different. Barely 16, eyes too steady for his years. He hadn't begged or cursed once since they left the creek bend where he'd been caught. Just watched the road stretch ahead like it owed him an answer. The bounty paper said he'd shot a ranch hand outside Silver Crossing, stole a horse, and vanished east. Sheriff's seal was clean, reward modest, but clean paid better than curiosity. Creel had learned that lesson the hard way. Still, every step toward Waylon felt heavier than the one before. The town rose out of the dusk, a few wood buildings leaning into each other, lanterns flickering to life one by one. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The blacksmith hammered his last for the night, rhythm dull and tired. Creel reined in near the sheriff's office, dust curling around the horse's legs. The boy didn't move. End of the trail, Creel said quietly, more to himself than the kid. He climbed down slow, boots striking dirt, the sound dull as distant thunder. Noah followed, stumbling once, catching himself before Creel could steady him. There was no fight left in him. Maybe there never had been. Creel led him by the rope toward the porch. The sign above the door read WAYLON Sheriff in faded paint, one hinge squeaking with each pass of the wind. Inside, a single lamp burned low. The air carried a mix of whiskey, sweat, and stale tobacco. Deputy Caldwell stepped out of the back room, wiping his hands on a rag, grin already in place. "Evenin', Creel. Figured you'd make it before night got thick." "You bring our prize," Creel kept his face still. "Noah Harper, wanted for murder, paper from Silver Crossing." Caldwell's grin spread wider. "That's the one. Sheriff'll be pleased come morning." His badge caught the lamplight, bright enough to look honest. His eyes didn't match it. He reached for the rope. Creel hesitated a heartbeat, then handed it over. The boy's gaze lingered on him, calm but cold. Caldwell tugged Noah inside, tossed a keyring off its hook, and pointed toward the back cell. "Get on in there, son. Don't make me drag you." Noah walked without a word, sat on the cot when the lock clanged shut. The sound carried through the office, iron closing on youth. Creel waited by the desk while Caldwell flipped open the ledger, flipping pages with fingers too slick for the work. The deputy hummed to himself, a tune that didn't belong in the company of the law. "Paperwork, paperwork," he muttered, "the backbone of justice." He pulled a pouch from the drawer and dropped it on the desk. "You're cut." The coins jingled soft, muffled by the leather, heavy enough to tempt most men. Creel didn't touch them yet. He glanced toward the cell. Noah sat still, hands folded, eyes on the floorboards. "He doesn't look like a killer," Creel said. Caldwell chuckled. "They never do till they hang." He poured a finger of whiskey from the bottle on the shelf, offered it across the desk. "To clean work." Creel shook his head. "I'll pass." Caldwell shrugged, took a swallow, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Suit yourself." The room felt too warm. Lamp hissed low, the flame bowing every time the wind found a crack in the wall. Creel's eyes drifted to the desk, stacked warrants, fresh ink, all the same handwriting. He saw his bounty sheet among them, folded neat. Under it, another page with the same sheriff's seal, same handwriting, different name. He didn't speak it, but the mark of the seal was still damp, ink shining wet. Caldwell followed his gaze. "All proper," he said, voice just a little too casual. "We keep things tidy in Waylon." Creel finally took the pouch, weighed it in his hand. He'd been on the trail long enough to know the difference between fair coin and dirty silver. This felt like the latter. "Sheriff not here?" he asked. "Out seeing to county matters." Caldwell smiled again, but the edge was wrong. "You'll get your signature in the morning." The wind pressed hard against the shutters then, rattling them in their frame. From outside came the muffled sound of boots, laughter, and the thud of a piano from the saloon 2 doors down. Creel turned toward the door, restless. "Justice sure keeps late hours here." "Justice keeps whatever hours it's paid to," Caldwell said. The way he said it made the word justice sound like a man's name. Creel reached for the door. The deputy spoke again, voice smooth but firm. "You did good work, Creel. Don't think too long on it. Ain't healthy." Creel paused. "He's just a boy." "He's a killer," Caldwell said flat. "Paper says so, that's all that matters." Behind him the lock clicked again, metal settling in place. Creel looked back once. Noah sat still as ever, the lamplight drawing hard lines across his face. When he spoke, his voice was soft but carried clear. "You think you did right," he said, "but you didn't." The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Caldwell laughed, but it sounded thin. "Don't mind him. He's just trying to shake your boots loose." Creel didn't answer. He stepped out into the street, the door swinging closed behind him with a tired sigh. The night had deepened while he was inside. The wind smelled of iron and ash, the way it does before a storm that never quite comes. He stood there a long moment, listening to the town breathe. The piano had stopped. The blacksmith's forge was dark. Just the creak of a hanging sign and the whisper of dust rolling along the street. He untied his horse, the coins in his palm pressing cold against his skin. He should have felt lighter, job done, debt settled, but the weight of those coins said otherwise. He slipped them into his coat, swung into the saddle, and rode slow toward the edge of town. Each hoofbeat echoed like a question he didn't want to answer. At the rise, he reined in and looked back. The sheriff's office glowed faint under the lamplight. He could see Caldwell's shadow moving across the window, and for an instant he thought he saw a second figure beside him, taller, stiller. Then it was gone. The air was too still, the quiet too careful. Creel rubbed a hand over his jaw, feeling the grit there, the kind that doesn't wash off easy. The law had faces like Caldwell's all over the frontier, smiles wide enough to hide the rot. He'd delivered the boy and the paper said justice had been done. But papers burn quick and the truth burns longer. He clicked his tongue, turned the horse down the trail, dust rising behind them like smoke. Somewhere behind that window the boy sat in chains, and the wind carried his words back down the hill. "You think you did right, but you didn't." The sound of it lingered as Creel rode into the dark, the coin pouch thumping soft against his side, heavy as guilt and twice as loud in his heart. Mason Creel made camp a few miles beyond Waylon, far enough that the town's lanterns were only pinpricks through the brush. The night hung heavy with that dry electric smell that comes before rain, thunder muttering far off over the flats. His horse grazed in the dark, hobbled loose near a mesquite stump. Creel sat by a small fire, watching the coals break and shift, throwing weak light on the saddle rolled beside him. The coffee in his tin cup had gone cold hours ago, but he kept sipping at it like habit might turn it warm again. Sleep wouldn't come. The boy's voice hadn't left his ears since he'd ridden away. "You think you did right, but you didn't." The words had no anger in them, just certainty, and certainty was worse. Wind sighed through the brush, bringing the faint echo of the town, a clink of metal, a burst of laughter from the saloon, then quiet. He reached for the coin pouch, loosened the strings, and spilled the contents into his palm. The coins gleamed dull red in the firelight, sweat from his hand darkening the leather beneath them. They didn't sound like pay, they sounded like weight. He thumbed one, turning it slow between his fingers, then laid them out on the ground, one by one, listening to the soft clicks they made against stone. That sound always used to please him, proof of a job done, trail closed, no questions left hanging. Tonight it only made him restless. He reached for the folded paper still tucked in his coat, the bounty for Noah Harper. The sheriff's seal caught a flicker from the fire, edges smudged from handling. He read the words again, though he already knew them by heart. Wanted for murder, reward $200, signed by Sheriff Amos Keir. He stared at that name, Keir. The ink looked too fresh, letters too careful. Creel turned the page over, then felt something else behind it. Another sheet folded tight. He frowned, pulled it free. Caldwell must have slipped it in by mistake. The same handwriting, the same seal, but a different name and a different date. Daniel Pike, he read under his breath. Horse theft. Same charge language, same wording line for line, like someone had copied it over. His gut nodded slow. He'd seen forged warrants before, back when he'd been young and too broke to ask where the money came from. The pattern was always the same: fresh ink, quick work, names that changed but crimes that didn't. He looked at the two papers side by side, the twin curls in the signature, the identical smudge near the seal. His fire cracked, spitting sparks into the dark, and he could almost hear Caldwell's grin again. Justice keeps whatever hours it's paid to. Creel let the papers fall to his boots. His chest felt tight, not from anger yet, but from something older. He leaned back on his hands, staring up at the bruised sky. Thunder grumbled again, closer this time. He remembered a night years ago outside Dry Butte. A man named Rowan Tate, dragged from a shack with a price on his head for robbing a payroll wagon. Creel had brought him in. A week later, he'd heard the man swung. 2 months after that, word drifted down the trail that Tate had never robbed anyone. The wagon job had been done by the deputy who'd signed the warrant. Creel had burned the notice then, but the smell of it stuck. He'd sworn he wouldn't look back anymore. Justice was a trail with no end, and a man could get lost counting ghosts. He thought he'd learned to live quiet with that. But tonight, the ghosts had found his fire again. He picked up the coins, slipped them back into the pouch, and dropped it on the saddlebag like it burned. He could hear the metal settle with a dull chink, heavy, final. The wind shifted, carrying a faint rattle of hooves somewhere down the draw. He froze, listening. The sound came slow, steady, maybe 2 or 3 horses, moving toward Waylon from the west road. He crouched low beside the fire, dousing a few coals with what was left in the coffee tin. Steam hissed up, thin and gray. The riders passed at a distance, silhouettes against the stars, one big frame up front, 2 behind hauling something that dragged. Could have been a wagon, could have been worse. He couldn't make out faces, only the glint of metal catching faint light. When they were gone, the quiet left behind felt too deep. He turned the papers in his hand again, running a thumb over the wet ink seal, and the shape of Caldwell's smirk returned unbidden. "Don't go digging in graves you don't plan to fill." He rubbed his jaw, the stubble rasping under his glove, and muttered to himself, "Maybe it's time someone filled one." Lightning flickered on the horizon, white and quick. He poured dirt over the last embers until the glow died, smoke curling thin as regret. The dark pressed close, full of waiting things. Creel packed the papers into his coat, cinched the saddle, and ran a hand along the horse's neck. "You're tired," he said quietly. "So am I," the horse snorted, shifting its weight. "But we ain't done." He swung up into the saddle, the leather cold against his legs, and turned the horse east toward the faint lights of Waylon. The wind picked up, tugging his coat, whispering through the scrub. Each hoofbeat on the hardpan echoed longer than it should, like something out there was keeping time with him. He rode slow at first, watching the stars fade behind thin clouds. The land below him stretched wide and gray, the kind of country that didn't care about right or wrong, just who had the faster draw and the better story afterward. The town looked smaller now, crouched in the distance, its few lanterns flickering like half-buried coals. Every mile between felt heavier. He reached into his coat, pulled out the coin pouch again and held it up against the starlight. The leather was damp from his hand, the weight unchanged. He thought of Noah Harper's voice, calm as confession. "You think you did right, but you didn't." He loosened the pouch, tipped it once. The coins spilled into his palm, then slid through his fingers to the dirt. They fell quiet, no ring to them, just soft thuds swallowed by dust. He left them where they lay. His piece wasn't for sale anymore. He urged the horse forward. The trail bent along the ridge where he'd left it hours earlier. Down below, the valley stirred with a crawling fog, the kind that moves slow enough to look alive. Lightning flashed again, closer now, painting the world in brief white bones. He smelled rain, faint but certain. As the first drops hit his hat brim, he saw Waylon's outline rise from the gray, the saloon's roofline, the church steeple, the low shadow of the sheriff's office. One lamp still burned behind its window. Creel stopped on the ridge, rain dotting his coat, his horse blowing steam into the wind. The sound of thunder rolled lazy across the flats, and the coin pouch at his side felt lighter now that it was empty. He took a long breath, rain sliding down his face, and for the first time that night the air tasted clean. The boy's words echoed again, but softer this time, less accusation than reminder. Conscience is louder than gunfire. He turned his eyes back to the town, to that single lamp that refused to die, and he knew where his trail led next. Waylon's lamp still burned. Rain had thinned to a whisper by the time Mason Creel reached the edge of Waylon. The fog hung low and white, softening the outlines of the town until everything looked half-remembered. His horse's hooves made no sound on the wet ground. The air carried that raw scent of metal and ash, the kind that lingers after a storm that never quite broke. He rode slow down the slope, stopping just shy of the first lamppost where a thin wisp of smoke curled from the blacksmith's chimney. No other signs of life. No voices, no footsteps, just the faint hiss of water dripping from rooftops and the creak of a loose shutter moving in the breeze. Creel tied off his horse in the alley behind the general store, the same spot he'd used earlier to restock on cartridges weeks back. The saddle leather squeaked, loud in the quiet. He waited a moment, listening to the town breathe. Somewhere behind the sheriff's office something clanked against wood, a wagon chain maybe, shifting under weight. He moved that way, boots careful on the wet boards, keeping to the shadows. The wagon sat half-covered by a tarp, droplets sliding down the folds. Beneath it was a shape too large and too still to be a barrel. The wheels bore fresh mud. He crouched, touched the wood, still damp, still warm from travel. Caldwell's midnight haul. His gut turned. He straightened, scanned the office windows. One lamp still burned inside, faint and flickering. He crossed the yard, hand brushing the revolver at his hip more from instinct than intent. The door wasn't locked. He pushed it open slow, hinges whining once before settling. The smell hit first, whiskey, sweat, stale cigar smoke. Inside, the desk lamp guttered low, flame dancing in its glass cage. Deputy Caldwell slumped in the sheriff's chair, boots on the desk, mouth half open, snoring in the heavy quiet. A bottle leaned against his leg, half drained, one glass still half full beside it. The safe behind him stood open a crack, ledger on top, papers scattered like cards across the floor. Creel stepped inside, closing the door behind him until only the hum of the lamp filled the room. His boots left dark prints on the floorboards. He picked up one of the fallen sheets, another warrant, ink still tacky, the same handwriting, the same seal. He crouched, found two more, identical save for the names. Elias Boone, Henry Pike, Clara Rhodes, all accused of the same charge, murder, horse theft, robbery, and everyone bearing the same date line, as if the world's crimes all happened in a single day. Creel's pulse slowed, hard and steady. He gathered the papers into a stack and turned toward the safe. Inside were coins, small stacks of them, and a neat row of sheriff's seals lined up like bullets in a case. Next to them sat a blank warrant form. No names yet, just the words WANTED by order of the law and an empty space waiting for a sin. He ran a thumb along the paper's edge. Smooth, expensive, bought for mass production. The deputy's racket wasn't justice, it was business. He thought of the wagon outside, the tarp moving in the wind. He didn't want to think what lay under it. He stared down at the seal again, its clean circle mocking him. His breath came slower now, rougher. For years he'd told himself that the line between law and chaos was worth guarding, no matter how crooked the hands that held it. Because once a man stopped believing in law, there was nothing left to aim for but survival. Yet here it was, law sold by the page, signed by drunks, delivered by fools like him. He felt the weight of every man he'd brought in pressing against his ribs. A whisper stirred in the dark corner of his mind, his own voice, low and cold. Doing nothing is the same as pulling the trigger. Creel straightened. The floor creaked. Caldwell snorted, shifted in his chair, then settled again. The man's face glistened in the half-light, slick with sweat, the color of sour milk. Creel took a step back, the boards underfoot groaning louder than they should have. From behind the cell door came a small sound, barely a whisper. "You came back." Creel turned. Noah Harper sat on the cot, back straight, eyes clear in the dimness. His voice carried quiet, sure. "I heard the wagon. You saw it too." Creel moved closer, keeping his tone low. "What's in it?" Noah's gaze didn't waver. "Last month it was another boy. Said he'd taken a horse that wasn't his. They said the same things to him they said to me. He didn't come back." His hands were folded loose on his knees. "They sell folks. Sheriff and his man. Sell 'em to the camps out past the canyon." The words landed hard, too heavy for a boy to say so calm. Creel swallowed. "How do you know that?" "Because I heard them talk about me like I was next." The cell bars threw lines of shadow across his face, cutting the light into narrow bands. He didn't look afraid anymore, just tired. Creel's hand brushed the blank warrant again. The seal glinted like a false coin. His heartbeat matched the tick of the lamp wick. He looked toward the door, rainwater dripping slow from his coat, and then back at the boy. "You keep quiet," he said. "Don't move till I say." Noah nodded once, no questions. Creel turned back to the desk, pocketed the blank warrant, and reached for the line of seals. The metal was cold, heavier than it looked. He slid one into his coat along with the paper. The ledger lay open beside the whiskey glass, lines of numbers and names scrawled in crooked ink. Beside each, "Paid." His hand hovered over it, then stopped. Caldwell shifted again, breath catching. Creel froze. The deputy's head tilted, eyes fluttering half open. "Who's there?" The words came thick, slurred. Creel stepped into the corner's shadow, coat blending with the dark. The lamp's flame flinched, guttered, painting the room in brief ghosts. Caldwell blinked, rubbed his eyes, stared at the safe, then the desk. His mouth twisted into a grin. "Sheriff," he mumbled, "you back already?" Creel didn't move. The man's head lolled forward again. The silence stretched thin as wire. Outside, the church bell struck once, then again, dull, hollow, marking the first edge of dawn. Caldwell stirred at the sound, muttering something that didn't reach sense. Creel's fingers tightened around the edge of his coat. The lamp flame rose, steadying just enough to show the man's eyes half open now, glassy and unfocused but turning toward the corner. For a breath, Creel thought he'd been seen. Then the deputy's chin dropped to his chest, a soft snore breaking loose again. The bell rang a third time, low and final, rolling through the fog like a warning. Creel exhaled, slow, silent. His hand found the warrant in his coat, paper whispering against fabric. He took one last look at the desk, the bottle, the seals, the ledger full of lies, and at the cell where Noah waited in the half-light, his small frame sharp against the shadows. The boy didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Creel moved for the door, steps soft on the boards. As he eased it open, the bell's echo faded, leaving only the drip of rain and the rasp of his breath. The light outside had turned gray, the kind of gray that comes before the sun starts to rise. He stepped out, the door closing behind him with a whisper. In his pocket, the blank warrant felt like fire against his chest. The law was awake now, and so was he. The dawn came clean and sharp, cutting the fog to ribbons as Mason Creel stepped into the chill air. The rain had left the world washed and new, but it couldn't rinse what he'd seen inside that office. The street lay quiet, boards wet and shining under the first slice of sunlight. Smoke from the blacksmith's forge coiled upward, the rhythm of his hammer already echoing through the stillness, each strike landing steady as a heartbeat, counting time against the choices Creel had left. He walked slow, coat collar turned up, the warrant folded crisp in his pocket, the weight of it hot against his chest. A woman swept the porch of the mercantile, her broom whispering across the boards. A boy led a mule toward the well, bare feet slapping mud. The town was waking the way towns always did, soft, certain, blind to the rot breathing just behind its own law. Creel passed them like a ghost, unseen though every eye flicked his way. The blacksmith nodded as he worked, sparks bursting from the anvil, the air alive with the smell of iron and smoke. It reminded Creel of the forge outside Bitter Creek years ago, where justice had been bent and hammered till it fit the hand holding it. He tightened his jaw, boots thudding soft against the planks as he crossed toward the livery. The stable doors stood half open, hay glinting gold in the early light. Inside the stable hand, a wiry kid barely 20 looked up from brushing a mare. "Mornin', Mr. Creel," he said, voice cautious. "Didn't expect you back so soon." Creel gave a short nod. "You see a wagon come through before dawn." The boy's eyes darted toward the canyon road before settling back on him. "Yeah, couple hours ago. Caldwell and 2 others. Didn't say much. Offloaded some crates out back, then rode out toward the canyon." "Crates?" Creel asked. The boy hesitated. "Heavy ones. Didn't sound like tools. Sheriff told me to keep shut." Creel's gaze didn't leave him. "You seen what was in 'em?" The kid swallowed. "No, sir, but I heard metal inside. Maybe chains." The word landed heavy, the kind that doesn't fade quick. Creel's face stayed still, but inside his stomach turned. "You didn't see nothing, son," he said quiet. "Best you remember it that way." The boy nodded, eyes wide. Creel stepped back into the sunlight. The wind carried the faint toll of the church bell, 3 slow peals rolling over the rooftops. He paused at the sound, staring down the main street. Everything looked so ordinary, smoke rising, shop doors unlocking, a woman laughing faint from a balcony. The kind of morning that made you believe the world was still worth saving, if only you could ignore what it cost to keep it. He touched the pocket where the warrant sat, the seal pressed against his ribs, uncomfortably close to his heart. For a moment he thought about mounting up, riding out before the town had time to notice. He could vanish into the next county, trade the papers for whiskey and distance, pretend this place never happened. But the boy's voice came back to him through the hum of the forge. "You think you did right, but you didn't." Doing nothing, he thought, is the same as pulling the trigger. The hammer strikes from the forge quickened, sparks snapping like gunfire. He turned from the livery, hand brushing the revolver under his coat, not to draw it, just to feel it there, a reminder of where choices end when talk fails. As he walked toward the center of town, a new sound cut through the morning, the steady rhythm of hooves on wet ground. The sheriff had come home. Amos Keir rode slow and tall, clean hat, badge polished bright, the kind of man built to look like authority. His horse stopped easy in front of the office, steam rolling from its nostrils. Keir dismounted with practiced calm, boots touching ground like he owned the dirt itself. He spotted Creel and smiled, that thin, polite smile that had sold more lies than any wanted poster. "Mr. Creel," he called. "Heard you delivered another fine bounty last night." Deputy said it was clean work. His voice carried the warmth of a preacher greeting a donor. Creel stopped short of the boardwalk, the sun catching half his face. "You weren't here to see it," he said. Keir chuckled, removing his gloves one finger at a time. "The law runs smooth in Waylon. Doesn't need my hand on it every minute. A sheriff's job is trust." He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough. "I do hope my man treated you fair." "He treated me," Creel said, tone flat. "Fair's another matter." Keir studied him, that polished look never slipping. "Something wrong with your pay." "Not the coin," Creel said. "The way it's earned." The sheriff's smile tightened at the corners. "Justice is a trade like any other, Mr. Creel. Takes strong backs and steady hands to keep it upright." He glanced toward the saloon as a few townsfolk drifted out into the street, curious eyes on them both. "Let's keep our talk civilized now. No need to stir the dust." "Dust's already stirred," Creel said. He kept his voice calm, measured, but it carried like the ring of a struck anvil. Keir's expression didn't change, but something behind the eyes cooled. "You're a man of the trail," the sheriff said. "You know what chaos looks like. Out here, we do what's needed to keep order. That's all this town cares to understand." He raised his hand slightly, the motion casual, a peace offering that could turn to a draw in half a breath. "You look tired, Mr. Creel. Join me for breakfast. Talk it through." Creel's gaze drifted past him toward the office window. Through the bars he saw Noah Harper sitting on the cot, awake, unmoving. The boy's eyes met his. No plea there, no fear. Just patience, the kind that waits for truth to finally show itself. The blank warrant in his pocket burned hotter. "Maybe I will," Creel said quietly. Keir clapped his shoulder once, friendly enough for the watching eyes, but his grip was firm, testing. "Good man. Always best to keep justice close to the fire." He nodded toward the saloon where a few townsfolk had started murmuring, whispers about missing men threading through the morning air. "See that?" he said. "People wake easy to rumor. We'll put it right before noon." Creel said nothing. The bell rang again, faint this time, from the church at the far end of town. He looked down the street where wagon tracks still marked the mud from last night, fresh, heading west toward the canyon. Keir followed his gaze, then smiled without warmth. "Freight delivery," he said. "Town business." Creel didn't answer. The wind picked up again, carrying the smell of the forge, the same rhythm of hammer and spark beating steady behind them. Every sound in the town, the broom on the boards, the anvil's ring, the faraway bell, seemed to tighten into one long-held breath. Keir turned toward the office, still talking low. "Breakfast, then settlement. Can't have a man of your standing riding off with questions in his head." Creel's eyes stayed on the wagon tracks a heartbeat longer before he fell in step beside him. The sunlight glanced off their badges, one polished bright, one dulled by the trail, and for an instant they looked cut from the same metal. The sheriff's hand rested near his holster as they walked, easy, practiced, not yet a threat but close enough. Creel felt the warrant crinkle in his pocket with every step. The town watched, pretending not to, the hush before the day's noise waiting to break. Two men, side by side, moving toward a reckoning neither could turn from. The hammering stopped the moment Mason Creel and Sheriff Amos Keir stepped into the sunlight. The whole town seemed to pause mid-breath. A wagon wheel creaked somewhere down by the smithy, then went still. Dust drifted slow across the street, catching the light. Faces filled the windows, shopkeepers, women holding curtains aside, the old men perched outside the saloon. Even the blacksmith froze with his hammer raised halfway, arm hanging in the air like the town itself wasn't sure what came next. The sound of their boots against the boardwalk carried clear as thunder in a canyon. Side by side they crossed the street, Keir still smiling that easy sheriff smile, though it looked tighter now in the morning glare. Creel kept his coat closed against the wind, the warrant folded flat in his pocket, the weight of his revolver heavy but patient at his hip. When they reached the office door, Keir gestured first, all civility. "After you, Mr. Creel," he said, voice smooth as oiled wood. Creel didn't move. "It's your house, Sheriff. Lead the way." Their eyes met, two men reading a page only they could see. Then Keir nodded, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The smell hit again. Whiskey, paper, iron. Caldwell was half awake in the chair, rubbing his face, muttering as the door banged shut. "Sheriff," he started, voice thick, "didn't expect." He stopped when he saw Creel, then looked toward Keir, confusion cutting through his hangover. "Something wrong?" Keir waved him quiet, moving behind the desk. "Just routine business," he said. "Our friend Creel here had questions about his paperwork." "Paperwork," Creel said, his voice slow, deliberate. "That's one word for it." He stepped forward and laid two sheets on the desk, the forged warrants and the blank one. The sheriff's seal glinted in the light like a coin tossed in blood. Keir's smile faltered for the first time. Caldwell leaned forward, blinked at the papers, then back at Keir. "Sheriff, that one wasn't supposed to." Keir shot him a look sharp enough to slice air. "Enough." His tone cracked like a whip, then softened. "Mr. Creel, you've been misled. These are drafts, samples for the circuit judge. Standard procedure." Creel didn't blink. "I've seen drafts before. They don't come with names of the dead printed clean in fresh ink." Keir's hand rested on the desk, fingers tapping once, twice, in the rhythm of a man measuring distance. "You're treading on dangerous ground," he said. "Justice doesn't need bystanders meddling." Creel nodded toward the door. "That justice?" he asked. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, townsfolk drawn by the silence, the way morning light always found the truth first. Through the crack of the curtains, sunlight slanted across the floor, bright and cutting. Noah Harper's voice came from the back cell, quiet but clear. "He's telling the truth," he said. The room went still. "I heard you," Noah continued. "You and him." His voice was calm, steady, the way only someone with nothing left to lose can speak. "You talked about the camps, about selling folks for freight. You said no one cared if a few disappeared." The blacksmith's hammer clanged outside, one strike sharp and final. The sheriff's jaw tightened, smile gone now. "Boy's delirious," he said, but his voice had gone cold. Caldwell shifted, eyes flicking between them, sweat beating at his temple. "Sheriff," he said low, "maybe we—" "Shut up," Keir snapped, and the crack of authority in it turned heads outside the window. Creel took a slow step closer. "You made the law your market," he said. "Stamped names for silver and sold men for miles. You called that order." Keir's hand slid toward his gun. "You don't understand what it takes to keep peace out here." "Maybe not," Creel said, voice soft but sharp. "But I understand what it costs." For a moment, neither man moved. The sun climbed higher, glinting off the badge on Keir's chest, the reflection flashing across the wall. Caldwell rose from his chair, trembling. "Sheriff, maybe we can talk." The gunfire came fast. One shot, then two. The first cracked the silence like glass breaking. The second was almost an echo. Caldwell stumbled backward, a surprised sound catching in his throat, then dropped. Smoke hung in the air, curling slow. Keir's gun was out, still raised, eyes wide. Creel hadn't moved yet, though his own hand hovered over his revolver, steady. "You just made yourself judge and jury," Keir said, breath shaking. Creel's reply was quiet as a prayer. "You did that long before I got here." The second gun roared. Keir staggered, eyes going glassy, and fell back into the sunlight slicing through the window. The light caught the dust hanging in the air, turning it gold. For a moment, it looked like the whole room was breathing again. Creel stood still, smoke rising from his revolver, heart hammering slow. The sound of it seemed to fill the silence that followed. Outside, the town had gone deathly quiet. Through the window, the crowd pressed forward, faces pale, eyes wide. The blacksmith's hammer fell once more, softer this time, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Creel turned to the cell. Noah was standing, hands wrapped around the bars. "You all right?" Creel asked. The boy nodded. Better than I was. Creel crossed the room, took the keys from the wall and unlocked the door. The hinges groaned. Noah stepped out, bare feet silent on the boards. His eyes went to the sheriff on the floor, then back to Creel. "You going to tell them?" he asked. "They'll see soon enough," Creel said. He reached into his coat and drew out the blank warrant, its edges smudged from his hand. "Here," he said, passing it to the boy. "It's yours now. Do what you want with it." Noah looked down at the paper, the empty space where a name should be. He tore it clean down the middle. The sound was small but sharp, like truth splitting wood. Outside, the crowd began to move. A woman from the mercantile stepped forward, shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. She took one look at the bodies, then at the boy, and shrugged off her coat, draping it over his shoulders without a word. Creel holstered his gun. "You'll need a real lawman here," he said, half to her, half to the town beyond. "One who remembers what the word means." She nodded, eyes wet but strong. "What about you?" Creel looked at the sunlight pouring through the bullet holes in the wall, the beams cutting through the dust like God's own judgment. "I just lit the match," he said. "You'll have to keep it burning." He stepped outside, the crowd parting in silence. No cheers, no words, just the sound of boots on boards and the slow whisper of wind across the street. He untied his horse, swung into the saddle, and turned toward the open plain. Behind him, Waylon stood in the clean light of morning. Smoke rose from the blacksmith's forge again, thin and steady, as if the world had decided to start working honest for a while. The wagon tracks out toward the canyon were already fading in the sun. Creel didn't look back. The air smelled new, the storm long gone. He rode slow at first, then faster, each hoofbeat driving the dust higher until the town was just another shape behind the light. He felt the sun warm against his coat, the badge of the man he'd killed glinting faintly where it lay in the dirt behind him. The law could be forged, he thought, bent, bought, buried. But the truth, the real kind, it rings when struck. And some days, that's all a man can hope to leave behind. You've been riding with old Western stories. If the tale hit your mark, give it a like, drop a comment about your favorite part, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next trail we ride. Don't forget, hit that subscribe so you're always in the saddle, and you'll always be ready when the next story rides in.